Hi, I'm Aaron.
And I'm Hardish.
This is a new podcast where we focus on things related to the economy and things that are related to your rice bowl. And so we feel like these are two things which are very current to the everyday man on the street. The role we plan to play in this episode is to basically help the everyday man understand what happens in economics because it matters to all of us, right? As a rice bowl issue.
Yeah. And so what is economy rice? Well, everything we talk about is about the economy, and economics is a rice bowl issue. So hence why we've called this podcast series Economy Rice.
So Hardish, maybe you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, I think when it comes to issues like this, there's always a tendency for anyone to sort of, easily provide commentaries on economic issues, right? So we've seen it a lot. So I think the context to that is really we challenge ourselves to at least upfront, maybe explain why are we even here to talk about this, right? Like, or to simplify it, like who are we to talk about this, right? I think which is a fair question. So for me, I think I view this from a few different ways in terms of my interest in this. Firstly, so I'm doing my postgrad, firstly in sustainable development, but a lot of it has to do with economics as well. I look at my research is really in growth, right, and sort of digital economies, right? But I'm also a licensed consultant. I help clients with making investments, right? And finally, I would like to think that I am a amateur economist by virtue of just being interested in this topic.
Right.
Being interested really means that you go beyond the headlines and really try to understand an issue a little bit deeper than what a normal person would, right? For the benefit of really understanding the issues.
Yes.
So I will ask you now. So Aaron, who are you to be talking about this?
Sure. So I have about roughly 10 years of professional experience in the investment industry. I was formerly a stock analyst as well as a fund manager. And I currently run a financial analysis newsletter full-time called Value Investing Substack. So if you're interested to visit it, you can find the link below. But I would like to imagine that I have enough chops to talk about macroeconomics, right? I actually spend a lot of time in understanding markets as well as the macroeconomic circumstances and reasons behind it. So, US, Malaysia, Japan, stuff like that. And, I'll leave for the audience to judge whether I actually know what I'm talking about. So the first issue that we're going to talk about today, or rather the topic for today's episode, is going to be about the Malaysian Ringgit. As we all know, the Malaysian Ringgit has been falling and declining for the longest time, right? And it has become a huge issue in the internet sphere. Right. And there's been a lot of economic commentators talking about what can be done, what are the reasons behind it. And our role today is really to try and distill the truth behind what is happening amidst all the noise, right? We want to try and extract the signal so that those who are interested to listen or those who are interested to understand can understand, right? We want to bring people closer to the truth.
Yeah.
The role I'll play on today's episode is going to be the government's point of view. So I am technically an economist and I do understand the ivory tower perspective of macroeconomic policy, what the government is doing, where they're coming from, how I think they should do it better, right? And ultimately, this podcast is not for economists. It's for the everyday person, right? And he will provide the questions necessary to answer, or rather the concerns of the everyday man. Right? And I will provide the supporting role to try and answer the man on the street's questions. Right.
Okay. So you want me to start with the first, to frame the basic issue? The basic issue is that there's been a lot of noise recently about the exchange rate, right? And this causing a lot of concern and also a lot of pain. But I think it also seems to be bothering a lot of people, bothering them enough that they have something to say about this. And this is what I'm really talking about, other economists and also people who want to weigh in on this issue, right? And it really starts with the exchange rate, which today, we recording this on 29th of March, was 4.71 to the USD, right? And just to qualify, this number is from Google because there was also an issue, I think 2 weeks ago, about the accuracy of the number, the data that was coming from Google, right? So just so at least the source of our data. This has led a lot of people to offer a lot of advice to the government, right? You can argue that many of this is unsolicited, right? But it is a free economy. People have a right to opinions,
right?
But at the same time, I think you can argue that for quite a while it seemed like the government was not taking this seriously, right? And I'm not making a judgment whether they will or not, but
that's a perception.
Yeah, but that's a perception, and I think it was a fair perception, right?
Okay.
It's not perceived to be taking this seriously. you leave open room for everyone to then weigh in.
Right.
And like one of the biggest argument being laid against the government is that when the current administration was in the opposition, this was exactly the same issue that they use, right? The exchange rate is very high.
Right,
Why isn't the government then doing enough and stuff like that? And that is the very same arguments that is being thrown back at them today, right?
Sure.
So as a result of that, there have been a lot of prescriptions out there. We've narrowed it down to 4. At least these are the 4 that we think is worthy to discuss a little bit more, right? And our discussion is really to maybe peel back these issues a little bit more and try to understand whether it's even practical to begin with, right? And if it is practical, whether it's actually going to move the needle or not. And the needle here is really in terms of the exchange rate.
Okay.
Right? Okay. But maybe to begin with, Aaron, you want to explain just a little bit of background, like why are we even here, this exchange rate, right? And what is causing this?
Right, okay. So most of us may be aware of, right? Recently, the government has come out very strongly saying that basically not our fault, right? They've been saying that the ringgit is actually fundamentally undervalued.
Yeah.
And this has ranged from various branches of government, right? From the actual treasury to the BNM and even quite esteemed professors around. And where this argument is coming from is that it's actually not really our fault, right? It's the US interest rate being very high, right? So if you know the typical economic framework of interest rates, you will know that developed economies tend to pay lower interest rates than emerging economies like Malaysia, right? Because they can get away with it. I mean, why wouldn't you pay less if you can, right? And if let's say you're the US, the number 1 economy in the world, obviously you will try and pay less than Malaysia.
Yeah.
So normally Malaysia's interest rate is higher than the US. But now the tables have been flipped, right? The US is now at 5.5% and Malaysia is what?
3%.
Exactly 3?
Let's just keep it at 3.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah, it's easier to keep it at 3.
Is that a economic prescription?
So, when we get into the prescription, it'll be higher, right?
Okay.
But right now, I think it's pretty much about 3. Yeah.
Right, okay.
The OPR, right? We're talking about OPR.
Yes, the OPR.
Yeah.
Because, of course, we won't go into the reasons behind the US high interest rate today, right? Maybe we'll do it in a separate episode.
Yeah.
But the point is that it is much higher than us today, which is unusual. And that's where the argument for Malaysia's ringgit being fundamentally undervalued comes from. Okay. Because think about it, if US offers high interest rates, then foreign investors will be more likely to pull money from Malaysian assets to invest in US assets.
Yeah.
And that causes your forex to go down. Yeah. Because now there's less demand for Malaysian ringgit, right? So that's the context of where we are today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And with that context in mind, so therefore you now have created a lot of room for a lot of people to weigh in on this issue. Right. And as I mentioned earlier just now, there are 4 key issues, right? But I want to maybe just provide some sort of an analogy to understanding this, right? And what I usually, the device I use is really, if you just think of a superstore with all the different currencies that you have, right? You walk into the superstore. If you were an owner of capital and you wanted to find like what currency do you buy, currently you walk into the superstore, you cannot deny that the US currency looks very, very attractive, right?
Yeah.
But everyone else in this that's sitting on the same shelf now they have their work cut out to try and make themselves stand out a little bit more, right?
Yeah.
And so therefore we get into the crux of it, which is like what can be done, right?
Sure.
And what can be done is led by like what can practically be done, right? And also what is easy for anyone to say that can be done, but you don't actually know whether it's going to really result in the intended outcome that you want, right?
Sure.
Maybe if it's okay, I'll just summarize what the 4 key so-called prescriptions are. For now, we're going to label it as unsolicited prescriptions, right?
Okay.
But we'll go through each one by one in more detail.
Right.
But I'll just name them for now. So the first one is for us to raise the OPR.
Okay.
Right. So we raise the OPR because we are at 3 and US is at 5.5, right? So that's the first prescription. The second prescription is to actually not trade with using US dollar.
Okay.
So of course the US dollar is the global currency of trade, right? But the argument here is that, well, if it's so expensive because of the price difference,
Right.
maybe we don't trade with that currency. We go to other markets, or we look to other partners and do a deal with them to trade directly rather than using the US dollar, meaning you bypass the US dollar, right? So that's the second prescription. The third prescription is that we have to increase more foreign direct investments. So meaning that essentially we try and attract more outside money into our economy. And thereby by doing that, you basically increase the demand for the ringgit, right?
Right.
So that's the third one. And the fourth one, which is something that maybe, to say is unsolicited, but it's more of a view that I think we probably share, and we think it's worth to be added onto the list, which is really like, all things being equal, is Malaysia attractive enough, or what can we do to make Malaysia more attractive? So without relying on all the other things, like people should just look at Malaysia on the shelf and say, yeah, we want to buy this, right? So what can you do? So those are the four, right? Do you agree that that is a good framing for the sort of all this advice that's being put out there?
Yeah, I mean, people have a right to their opinions. I don't think it's a right or wrong, right? Like it's not a moral issue, even if you have a wrong prescription. Right? So yeah.
Okay, so let's get into one by one, right?
Yeah,
so the first one is very simply to raise the OPR, right?
Right.
So when you say raise OPR, the argument is that, well, the US interest rate is 5.5%, ours is at 3%, so you just need to raise it. And the idea of raising it is so that we are more attractive, right? If the interest rate is higher, then people earn more money. It's basically interest income, right? I mean, the simple way to explain this is your FD. You put the FD in the bank. If the interest rate is 4 instead of 3, you're getting better returns, right? Is a more attractive, right? So let's start with that. Raise OPR. Yeah, how practical is this?
Right. So I think the starting point of this question would be the US interest rates themselves being raised by the Federal Reserve. Right. So as we all know, the Federal Reserve has hiked interest rates from 2% to 5.5% today. Right. And there's even talk of it possibly going higher with recent US inflation.
And that hike has happened in a relatively short time, right?
Yes. So it's like been 2.5 years plus, right?
Yeah.
That's a very short time to be raising interest rates so high.
Yeah.
The question then becomes, why doesn't Malaysia raise its OPR by the same amount to make the ringgit more attractive and make the forex more attractive? I think we all can intuitively understand why this is not a practical solution. Imagine if the BNM raised the interest rates by 2% to 4%, to 5%.
Yeah.
It would affect borrowing costs. It would affect the risk-free rate. It will increase the cost of the entire economy. Yes, it would reduce inflation by virtue of reducing demand. Right. But I think most of us here can agree that we don't want that to happen. Okay. So as a practical matter, I think it's true to say that raising the OPR to equally match the rate hikes of the US interest rates is not feasible in isolation.
Okay. Yeah. But also I think it goes beyond that, right? So it doesn't seem to me to be as simple as even matching it. So like, if you say that, okay, if US interest rate is 5.5, ours is 3, let's raise it to say even 5 or 5.5.
Right.
It is still not equal, right? It's not equal because the relative strength and the attractiveness overall of the US dollar, given the size, the amount of money supply, how much is used in global trade and stuff like that.
Right.
Conceptually, to me, it feels like the ringgit will have to be much higher than 5.5 to have the same attractiveness, right? If I could put it that way, right? So yeah, it's not even as easy as just matching it, right?
Yeah. So basically, for us to even become as attractive on the superstore metaphor, right, we probably need to raise it to 7.
Right.
So think about what if our interest rate went to 7%? Like, what will happen to the economy?
Right.
Right. Yeah.
There's also, I think it seems like there's some hesitation as well by the central bank to raise the OPR. And one way I think about that is also probably has to do with given we already have very high household debts. Pretty much everyone in Malaysia has debts, right? And so if you raise the OPR, there is very real pain in the economy.
Right.
I think conceptually you can, right? In theory, there's nothing stopping you, but we are trying to bring this down to a practical level, right? Whether it is even a good step to consider, right? So from that point of view, how much does the pain and the effect that it will have in terms of the debts to us, right, really play into the considerations for such a prescription?
Sure. So our household debt to GDP is about 80%.
Yeah.
Right, and the government debt to GDP is about 60. I forgot what the corporate debt to GDP was, but it's also quite high. So let's just stick to households, right? Just to understand the idea. Let's say we wanted to raise interest rates to 5% in order to combat the forex. What happens to your mortgage? I'm not 100% sure of the quantum, but I think most of us have seen our mortgage payments go up by several hundred ringgit since the pandemic period. Right, and that was raising by about 1%, maybe plus a bit. I forgot. Right, I think at the lowest point it was 1.8. Today it's 3. Right.
Right.
You know what? If you double that,
right.
Like the there's a meme, right?
Yeah.
Double it. Right?
Yeah.
So most of us can intuitively understand that if you have to make more payments to your mortgage payments, it will come out from somewhere else.
Right.
And that's lower consumer spending. That will actually hurt the economy. And ironically, the fundamental side getting hurt will actually drive down your forex. Make your superstore position less favorable.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think like right now, as you mentioned, right, is a 80% debt to GDP, right? So that when you look at the numbers, is about 1.48 trillion. That's the value of the debt, right?
Right.
So if you sort of divide that by the population, it is about 45,000 ringgit that each of us owe to financial institutions, right? And I was trying to think about this, right? So I think one of the issues with all this economics and all that is that sometimes you start with very big numbers. When you start with very big numbers, immediately like alarm bells go off. And I was trying to think about this, that if you break it down on a per capita basis, about 45,000 ringgit,
right,
which is about the price of a basic, like a Perodua, right? The basic Perodua. Basically, that is all of us.
MIV.
Yeah, basically all of us owe the banks a MIV, right?
Yeah.
Right? If you think of it that way. I was trying to figure out, is it really that painful? Right. And to qualify the comment, I think obviously our society is very complex, right? I mean, you have the B40, M40, and T20 and all that. Obviously, for very rich people, 45K is they can stomach it. But when you look at the median salary, right, where we know, I think it's about 2-3 or something, the median salary.
Right.
2-3, 2-4, if I'm not mistaken, right?
I think it's higher than that. It's about 3,000, roughly.
Median, okay, but the idea basically is that a lot of people probably don't appreciate this concept of median, right? Median basically means that is the person in the middle, right?
Yes.
So that means it's like there is half the population is below that. That is a median salary. Then 45,000 is significantly that's more than 10 times, right? There's almost 12, 13 times.
From an annual perspective, it's about 1 year.
Yeah. So exactly.
More than 1 year, right?
Yeah.
More than half.
Yeah. So you start to see the problem, and I think maybe that caps in terms of what we really can do.
Yeah,
so,
I agree with you.
So to summarize, what we're going to try and do is like for each one of this, we have to then not actually take a vote, but we have to like try and come up to some sort of a conclusion in terms of whether it's practical or not, right?
Okay.
So this argument about raising OPR, where do you stand? Practical?
I think it cannot be done in isolation, right?
Okay.
It can form as a part of a suite of policy tools, but asking us to raise to 7, right, is just not practical. Just to defend the forex, I think most of us, even without being economists, will agree that we don't want that to happen.
Yeah. But to that point, I mean, if the idea of raising it to make it attractive, well, I mean, I think Argentina interest rate is about 100+%, right?
Yeah, 100. What is it now? I think it's 80, right? The latest one?
Yeah, I think currently it's 80%.
At the highest point,
it was about 130%, 130%, right?
Yeah.
And that doesn't seem to be attracting. I mean, investors are not flocking there to get the 120% return on their investments, right?
I mean, Argentina is its own. It's its own issue, like it's a failed state. There's actually a very famous quote by a Nobel Prize-winning economist.
Right.
His name is Simon Kuznets, right? He said that there are four types of countries based on their economies.
Right.
Developed, underdeveloped, Japan, and Argentina.
Okay.
So you can see that Argentina is legitimately a failed state.
Right.
So I don't think Malaysia is anywhere near that, right?
Okay.
And we don't really need to worry about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we will put OPR as a no for now, right? Okay, so that brings us to the second argument,
right,
which is the simple way to think of it is basically you de-dollarize, right?
Yes.
Mainly you don't trade in the US dollar.
Or rather, we trade more in other currencies.
Trade more in other currencies.
Right.
And I think this leads us to a very simple solution, which is then you just trade more with China.
Right.
How easy is that? Can
Okay,
we just
I think there are two contexts or two premises we need to observe here. One is that everybody else's currency has fallen. It's not just Malaysia. Of course, if we have time, we might want to ask why Malaysia fall more than others, right?
Yeah.
But the point is that
the context of that is Malaysia is the second worst performing in Asia after the yen, right?
And that's not. We might as well be the worst already, right?
Right. Okay. Yeah.
The secondary context is I was actually quite surprised to realize this earlier that Malaysia is actually one of the top 10 importers of China, which means one of the top 10 exporters to China.
Yeah.
And you think about China, right? They have a 20 trillion economy. Ours is something like 400 billion, right? US dollars.
Yeah.
And that's a 50 times differential. So the fact that we are a top 10 exporter to China is quite amazing, right?
And it will mean that they are primarily our export market, right?
Yes, correct. They are a very large export market. So when the policymakers our policymakers said that Ringgit is fundamentally undervalued, it's actually a two-pronged answer. The first one is due to US interest rates, like we described. The second one is that China is currently going through a slowdown. Right? And there's a very nice saying that when the US sneezes, everyone catches a cold. But when China sneezes, Malaysia catches a cold. Right?
Okay.
Because we are literally a top 10 exporter to China.
Yeah.
So China's currently going through its own issues. It's fighting its own battles. And quite frankly, I don't think it has space to worry about us. So of course, it's great if we could, encourage more trade with China. And I'm sure, to be fair to our government, I'm sure they are trying, right? But if China does not have the current capacity, right, temporarily to do that, then there's not a lot you can do. I mean, try and imagine Malaysia government telling Chinese government what to do, right? They'll just tell you sorry, right?
Right.
Politely. So I don't think it's wrong. And in fact, you could even argue that they should push in that direction.
Right.
But as a policy solution for the weakening ringgit, I don't think it's a real realistic path.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just one point I want to maybe expand a little bit on this part, right, in regards to, say, trading more with China, before we move on to the other arguments. As I understand it, even though we export a lot to China, or rather, to really appreciate it, is China imports a lot from Malaysia. Right. The nature of the goods that are currently being imported is sort of lower value, right?
Right.
I mean, not only do we want to do more trade with them,
okay,
I think we would also want to higher quality trade with them, right? Which means that it's still, the question comes back whether do we have the higher quality goods that China will demand, whether now or going into the future. Any comment on that?
I think if you want to be really objective, China is still in the manufacturing stage or industrial stage of its national development. So normally it moves from agricultural to manufacturing to services, right?
Yeah.
And China is trying to graduate there, but it's not there yet. When I say manufacturing or industrial, I also mean that it's lower value added goods, right? Think of something higher value. So for instance, financial services or AI, stuff like that, right? That's what we typically associate with a developed economy,
right?
High performing, high value added exports. China is still very much providing exports in the lower value added part of the supply chain,
right?
The global supply chain.
Okay.
And Malaysia is, I like to call China the factory of the world, and Malaysia is the factory to the factory of the world,
right? Okay.
Being a top 10 exporter, right?
Right. Okay.
So, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah.
China is really still on the lower value added part.
Okay. Yeah. So where do we stand with this prescription?
I think it's really
50-50?
the ball's in China's court.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So we have the ability to pass the ball to them.
Right.
But they need to pass the ball back to us.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So we can only hope for them to get over their cold and come back
to be fair, I do think that China can get past its current moves within 3 to 5 years. But it's still 3 to 5 years, right? It's not 3 to 5 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And certainly not the 3 to 5 weeks that most social media people are expecting.
And if I may just make a comment, the Malaysian government does not have the luxury of 3 to 5 years, whereas the Chinese government does.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
I mean, just to bring in some politics into this. But we'll not go into detail on that. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, as a policy solution, is not there.
Okay. So sorry, that is also not likely to happen. Okay.
Okay, our goal is not to make anyone happy. It's to bring the truth to you.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move to the third one. And the third one is to increase FDI. FDI is foreign direct investment, right?
Right.
So I think the Prime Minister, our Minister of Trade, Tengku Zafrul, they've been very active, right? A lot of trade missions,
right.
A lot of foreign visits and all that, right?
Yes.
And all of it has to do with trying to bring in investments, right? And if I understand correctly, the idea here is that if you want to bring in investors to set up base here or set up their businesses here or invest in the local economy. And by doing so, there are spillovers, right? You create jobs, and then that is all will sort of increase the demand in the economy.
Right. Multiplier effect.
Yeah, multiplier effect. But you also will create more demand for the local currency, right? Maybe you can, from a technical perspective, you can just give a little bit of background to this argument, whether I have it right or not.
Yeah, sure. So I think before we even talk about the relationship to the ringgit, right, the forex, it's important to get the context, right? So why is FDI even suggested as a possible policy solution to strengthening the ringgit? It's because, ultimately, your position, your favorability on the superstore, right, as a currency is based on demand and supply, right? The more demand there is, the higher your strength, the stronger your ringgit goes. So FDI is basically capex, right? Foreign direct investment. So, if someone wants to build a factory here or wants to, set up some data center, let's say, right? They will invest capex into the country, and that is FDI. So that is in contrast to trade flows, right? So that our exports to China, that's trade flows, right? Trade flows fall under what we call the current account, right? And FDI falls under what we call the financial account.
Okay.
And then without getting too complex, right? There are basically three accounts: the current account, the capital account, and the financial account, which form the balance of payments, which is ultimately the nation's cash flow statement.
Okay.
And since forex is the price of your currency, right? It depends on the demand and supply for your currency, and it depends on cash flows, right? In and out of the country. So the question becomes: is FDI a reasonable lever for the government to increase in order to defend the strength of the ringgit?
Right.
And I think there is an argument to be made here because I just checked the latest FY23,
right.
Distribution between the current account, the capital account, and the financial account.
Right.
And obviously, as an emerging economy, you would expect most of the BOP to be coming from trade flows, right? Because think about it, it's a lot easier.
BOP is balance of payments, right?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Right. So when I say BOP, I mean balance of payments.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to export, something than it is to get people to invest in a factory here, right? I mean, for very intuitive reasons, right?
Yeah.
So you would expect as a relatively small country or relatively small economy that our trade flows will dominate the balance of payments, right? The current account will dominate. But I was actually quite surprised to find out that FDI is a relatively large portion of our balance of payments, right? So, of course, when I say trade flows, I mean the current account, okay? The FDI is being part of the financial account is about 20 to 25% of the current account historically, right? As an average concern, long-term concern. And quite frankly, I did not expect that.
Okay.
But if the question is, could the government defend the ringgit by encouraging more FDIs? I think the answer is a straight yes.
Okay.
Right? Of course, the prudence of the execution is a different matter.
Okay.
But from a theoretical standpoint, ivory tower perspective, yeah, definitely.
Okay. So for 2023, I looked this up, right? So 2023, the approved investments was 329 billion is ringgit, and 42% of that was foreign. No, wait a minute. The other way around. 57% of that was foreign. So foreign investment was slightly half of that, 329.
Approved investment.
So approved investments, 329 billion. Foreign investments made up about 57% of that.
Right.
Okay. So, and I mean, we've seen this even in the headlines recently, right? So a lot of the big companies are coming in here. They've been setting up. There was a big trade mission to China. There was one recently to Germany. And this is sort of been ongoing, right, to attract
right.
foreign investors. But if you look at the nature of foreign investors, right? You mentioned you look at the numbers. So the numbers is one part of it. I also think that we have to account for the nature of these investments, right? The nature of investments, you can imagine that, in the 90s and all that, it would have been very infrastructure driven, right? Because that's what the country needed. So infrastructure here is very tangible, right? Big projects, right? Ports and stuff like that.
Yes.
Then that also has spillovers and all that. But to me, I think my argument is that when you look at the nature of the investments today, a lot of it tends to be in the digital economy. And of course, it's fair because that is the nature of how economies are evolving.
Right.
And as we become from a high emerging economy into a high income economy as well, we also transition into a service-based economy.
Right.
So that's to be expected, right?
Right.
But one feature of digital investments or digital economy is, and something that a lot of people don't account for, is that it is inherently human replaceable by nature.
Right.
It doesn't. It is not labor intensive, right? So whereas manufacturing and all that is labor intensive.
So it actually replaces labor.
Yeah, it
rather
replaces
than
labor.
augments it.
Yeah. So the question is that the numbers could be one thing. And no one's questioning the numbers, right? So the money actually comes in, but I think there is a cap in terms of the actual spillover, in terms of jobs and all that, right? Because you are going to be requiring less people, but people who are more skilled,
right,
to be able to do the same things, right, and get the results, the ROI that you want. I'm not asking for a right or wrong, but it's just. I think that that is just a feature of this kind of investments. And if you look at a lot of the announcements that have been made in FDI, true enough, a fair amount of it is data centers, right? And what is a data center? It's just a server farm, right? I mean, you're not putting...
You need two guys around.
Okay. I do think there's a benefit in us, maybe as a result of this, like our construction industry being really good at building data centers, right? Because data centers have very specific requirements in terms of the energy, in terms of efficiency and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I think that's great, right? But in terms of the operations as well, these are not labor intensive, right?
Okay.
So but if you have a counter to that before we try and summarize whether this is good or not.
I think that, first of all, it's important to recognize that Malaysia is a developed economy, right? So the definition of that is $30,000 per capita. And you can argue about the distribution of that, but technically we are, right? So we should be graduating to the service economy. Yeah. And, I think there is, on one hand, what you say is true that it does replace labor. Yeah. But I think it doesn't really imply automatically that it takes away value, right? Because yes, while it does effectively, quote unquote, reduce jobs, from an economic standpoint, at least at a national level, it redistributes the labor to other sectors which need it. Right? And if you can do something more efficiently, ultimately it boils down to ROI, right? So there's a net ROI increase. And I would argue that in the data center example, in isolation, it's probably a net positive, especially with AI and everything.
So in summary, increase FDI, where are we on this?
Okay, so technically, yes. Okay. Practically, right? You have to ask yourself how feasible it is to get Toyota to invest in the new plant, every year or something like that, right? Because you're talking about large numbers, right? Yeah. To influence the entire forex of the country. Yeah. So, it's a difference between theory and execution. Yeah. That's how I put it.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And that brings us to our fourth and final prescription, right? It's something I think about a lot as well. And the idea here is about all things being equal, meaning that you acknowledge that you can't do much because the US has, the sole right to do whatever it wants. Damn the rest of the world.
Fundamentally undervalued.
Right. So you can't really compete with that.
Right.
You can't. Okay, China is going through its own problems. There's not much you can do. You can definitely engage them, but it is not really. In their court. Yeah. Correct. Balls in their court. FDI, we're already doing that. I think we're doing as much as we can, probably, right? So now the question really is that But where does that leave us in terms of our existing assets, right? And when I say assets, is really our businesses,
Right.
our what we have, our attractiveness, right?
On a fundamental level.
Yeah, on a fundamental level,
Okay.
right? So bear in mind, like when you say FDI, you are asking people to come in and do something new.
Right,
Fundamentally, it's doing something new, right?
Right.
And you come in and do something new for all these reasons.
Right.
But we already have assets to begin with, right? And these assets is, let's just say, all the public listed companies on Bursa.
Okay.
Right now, coming back again to an owner of capital, you are constantly looking for the best deals, right? And if you find a best deal, if you find a good deal, I think everything else becomes secondary, right? Ultimately, you want a really good deal.
Correct.
So my argument, if I can give it a little, if I can qualify it, is that if you actually look at the public listed companies on Bursa Malaysia, and we looked at the Bursa report about in terms of the foreign investments in Bursa on Bursa Malaysia is only about 30%. Right. So everything else is local investments, and that seems to hint that foreigners are not as attracted to what we currently have to offer,
because we need to buy most of it.
Yeah, right. So we are the ones filling up the
Gap.
the gap, right?
Yeah.
We are the ones buying our own products, lah. Right?
Yeah.
Right? Now, I think where it becomes interesting is because currently, even with everything that's going on right now in terms of high interest rate, high inflation globally, and all that, you also have a huge demand for companies that are going to be more sustainable, renewable energy, and all that. Right? There are trillions worth of money looking for this kind of investments.
Sure.
So that has to be an argument in terms of if there's that amount of money looking for somewhere to live.
Yeah.
Right, somewhere to
looking for a home,
looking for somewhere to land, right?
Right.
Then you have to factor that in. Is like, why are we not attracting it? And my argument from a very simple perspective is just me as a consumer, right? And I can ask you the same question as well. You look at all the companies that we have, right? Or let's narrow it down. Let's just go to the KLCI, right? Okay. So there's the top 30 companies, right? Right? Correct? Yeah, top 30 companies.
Roughly, yeah.
So top 30 companies, if you look at the list, there are our financial institutions, there are telcos, there are construction companies, right? What else is there? Utilities, right? Now, you ask yourself as a consumer in this economy, do you really feel that they have wowed you with their service?
Wowed you?
Yeah, wowed you. Have they wowed you with their service? I mean,
okay.
You know what I mean? It's basically like how innovative they are, right? Because innovation is what will attract investments, right? Right. So, and I feel, no, I mean, I think, okay, I mean...
You're referring to Malaysian businesses.
Yeah, Malaysian businesses,
okay.
Right? So this is the KLCI, right?
Right.
So, but we are all consumers, right? I mean, the list of telcos on the KLCI, all of us are, all of us are consumers of either one of them, right?
Okay.
Right. So when you think of it as a point of view of even the banks, for example,
right?
When you look at all the innovation that has happened in the banking space, is actually really coming from fintechs. It has not been coming from banks. I have not heard any bank do something that has wowed me, right?
Amazed.
Yeah, amazed me. But I have apps on my phone right now that really allow me to do some amazing things in fintech, right? There's a lot of innovation.
Like what? Like Stash Away? Something like that?
Well, let's use a company like Touch and Go, for example, right? And I'm not advocating for them. I mean, I have no real relationship with them other than having their wallet. But if you look at the amount of products that they have launched just on that one app, it's a lot, man. I mean, they have a lot of features, right?
Yes.
That literally the only reason they are not my app of choice for banking is because technically they're not a bank, and therefore they don't qualify for deposit insurance. So they are a non-bank financial institution, right?
Okay.
So that's like the only leap that they have left to take, right? And otherwise, it's like I don't need any other bank. I don't need, let's not name them, I don't need any of the other banks, right?
Yes.
And so I feel like there's just no innovation at all.
Okay.
Right? And that is reason why we are not attracting foreign investments.
So you're basically connecting the weakness, or rather the long-term weakness of the ringgit
to innovation,
to the lack of innovation.
Yeah.
I think there is some truth to that. So I actually recently wrote an article for East Asia Forum, where we explored the longer term reasons rather than the short term reasons behind the Malaysian Forex. And to keep it short, it's basically describing that we have underperformed economically and by extension innovativeness relative to our other peers who were IMF debtor countries, right? Say South Korea, Indonesia, and Thailand. So I don't really want to get too much into the weeds, but I think there is some legitimacy to your argument that we have fallen behind a very bit. Okay, so this is a complicated question. My mind is sprawling everywhere. Right? I'm trying to keep it short. But from a innovativeness standpoint, right? Okay, here's how I answer it. Innovativeness can be represented by the TFP or
total factor
production as an economic indicator,
right?
And I think this will improve going forward. Okay, so of course, if you really wanted to, you could argue that what you were saying is correct. We are declining in innovativeness for the past 20 years.
I would say more, it just feels stagnant.
No, so the thing is this, right? There's actually very good reasons for it. Because of, I'll just give you a one sentence without going too deep.
Okay.
After 1997, our banks got really scarred and the government chose a trade-off of not taking too much risk with the financial sector. Which is why in 2008, we barely felt the recession, whereas the rest of the world was really bad, right? Unfortunately, the banks are like 30% of our KRCI, right? And the GLICs are also administrated by the same government. So you can see why it's sluggish, right? But that was a trade-off we chose and which benefits us on the downside. You got to remember, we are small fish in the big sea. Now, going forward, to answer directly your question about solutions as well as impact to future Forex, I think Malaysia does have a good chance of improving TFP. And why do I say that? It's not because we are great, right? It's because we are very lucky. We are positioned geostrategically in a very important part of the world, the Malacca Straits. We have good relations with both sides of the geopolitical divide, right? And we are really poised to become the next factory of the world by inheriting the mantle from China. And when I say we, I mean ASEAN as a whole. Right? So without turning it, maybe we can do a separate episode about that. But Malaysia has a lot to look forward to in terms of improving its innovativeness, right? And it's actually partly because others are coming in. So look forward to the Ringgit having better days.
And I look forward
but don't count on it. don't count on what I say.
and I look forward to being wowed by, our present companies.
Maybe be from a foreign bank, you never know, right?
Right. No, I should say that actually, in terms of for selfish reasons, I'm okay with that, right? Because I just invest in the startups that are going to disrupt the incumbents, right? But I mean, from an economic point of view, I just feel that we were just cruising, right? I'm not talking about government, right? I'm talking about the leadership behind all these companies, right? It feels
the country as a whole, basically.
Well, I don't want to lay the blame on the country, right? Because if you lay the blame on the country, then what explains why we have so many young entrepreneurs that are very promising? I think it is just, there seems to be, what's the word?
Bureaucracy?
Envy?
Envy?
No. It's just like, we're just cruising, right? And I don't know whether that's because there's no worry about what's coming behind you in terms of innovation, in terms of disruption. Okay. And I mean, no, but honestly, are you happy with the services you are getting?
I mean, no, but I don't think my opinion matters much.
Okay, no, but as a consumer, right?
Consumer, I know where you're coming from. Right? I know where you're coming from.
Okay.
So as a short-term matter,
right?
I think we can all agree that TFP is not going to increase overnight. It's going to be a 20-year thing.
Okay.
Even if it does. So the answer is no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. My answer is I hope to see more innovation.
Sure.
Okay, so to wrap that, so those were the four.
Right.
But I want to wrap this up by asking you a question that hopefully brings the loop back, right? Loop back up to the core question, right? Which is really what's driving this is the exchange rate, right?
Yes.
Or rather the fact that it's fallen, right? If we can end this by you maybe answering a very simple question. Is Forex declines even necessarily a bad thing?
Yes, so I think this will be an ivory tower response, right? But I think the government is not wrong to say that we are fundamentally undervalued, right? And actually that Forex is not that bad of an issue, right? So what do I mean by this? If you think about what our currencies, our fiat currencies mean, right? They actually are not tethered to the ground in terms of the real economy. So they do not necessarily reflect the real value of the economy the way a currency based on the gold standard might be. Right? Because I'm sure we all know, right, that fiat currency is just pieces of paper that has no intrinsic value. Right? So think about what Forex means between two fiat currencies. Is the relative value between your piece of paper and my piece of paper, right? It's like your Tesco voucher versus my Aeon voucher. Right? I mean, technically, there is no intrinsic value to it. And it's just that we, as a society or civilization, has progressed to the point where we have accepted worthless pieces of paper as money, as exchange of value. Right? So let me make it a bit clearer, right? Think about your bank when it gives you a loan, right? What do? They will create a loan asset, right? And they will create a loan liability, right? Or a deposit, in their point of view. Your currency is basically the liability of the central bank. Or to make it even simpler, let's say I buy something from you on credit terms. You create a receivable, I create a payable. We both create this double entry out of thin air, but there's no cash being exchanged. There's no real value exchange. When we get money from the central bank in ringgit, in US dollars, right? That is literally just the payable of a central bank. Like there is no intrinsic value behind it. So what does that say about our relative forex between USD and the payable of the worthless payable from a legal perspective of the Federal Reserve versus the worthless payable of the BNM? Technically, there's no relationship with the real economy at all. And I want to be clear, consumer sentiment matters, right? And since forex is a reflection of demand and supply for currency, consumer sentiment does affect the forex, right? But technically, right, there's like a roughly 2% or 1% difference between whether it is 4.95 and 5.05, right? And I would say there's a 2% weakening, or is it a 3% weakening? But it's not the economic disaster that it is implied to be when the ringgit crosses the threshold of 5 to USD. So I would say that forex decline are not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, I would even go so far as to argue from an ivory tower perspective that forcing the government to keep it below 5 through artificial measures, as they seem to be forced to be doing right now, will actually hurt the real economy even more.
Okay. So I think we've covered that. Hopefully this is of value to not just the audience, but also many of these armchair economists. And if they disagree, we welcome them to drop a comment. And maybe we'll pick up some of the questions in future episodes as well.
If you have any questions that you would like us to answer next time, please feel free to drop them in comments. At the very least, we hope that we've provided a bit of therapy, emotional therapy, right, regarding the forex ringgit issue. Because quite frankly, from my economic technical point of view, I don't see it as the biggest problem we should be concerned about.
Okay, so that was the first episode of Economy Rise. We will be back with more episodes. So please subscribe to this channel and follow us as well. Thank you.
See you next episode.